So when Maria was a young adult still living at home, she was into collecting old vintage stuff, especially dolls. Her room was full of them. Porcelain dolls, rag dolls, ones with glass eyes that followed you around. It was her thing, and she'd hit up antique shops and flea markets looking for unique finds. I always thought they were kind of creepy, but she loved them. One day she found this old, handcrafted doll at a yard sale. It wasn't like the others. It had this weird, almost human-like face, stitched with thick black thread for the mouth and button eyes. The woman selling it looked relieved when Maria picked it up, like she couldn't wait to get rid of it. Maria thought it was charming in a strange way and bought it for practically nothing. When she brought the doll home, everything seemed fine at first. She added it to her collection, right on a shelf next to her bed. But within a few days, she started feeling like something was off. It wasn't anything obvious, just this sense of being watched. You know when you're alone, but you feel like someone's there with you? That's how she described it. But she brushed it off, thinking it was her imagination. When she brought the doll home, everything seemed fine at first. She added it to her collection, right on a shelf next to her bed. But within a few days, she started feeling like something was off. It wasn't anything obvious, just this sense of being watched. You know when you're alone, but you feel like someone's there with you? But the next morning, when she woke up, the doll wasn't on the shelf. It was on the floor, face down. She didn't remember it falling, but figured maybe it slipped off during the night. Still, it made her feel uneasy, but she didn't say anything to anyone. Things got weirder after that. A few nights later, she woke up around 3 a.m. with the feeling that someone was standing in her room, right by the bed. She thought it was just a dream at first, but then she heard this soft scratching sound, like something brushing against the wall. She turned on her lamp, and there, sitting at the edge of her bed, was the doll. Its head was tilted again, facing her. Maria freaked out. She knew for a fact she hadn't touched the doll, and there was no way it could have moved itself. She grabbed it and shoved it back on the shelf, trying to convince herself that maybe she had somehow moved it without remembering. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. After that night, she started hearing whispers, faint, almost like they were coming from inside the walls. They'd start as soon as she turned off the lights, just low murmurs, impossible to make out. She was starting to lose sleep, and whenever she tried to tell herself it was all in her head, something else would happen. The doll would appear in different places, sometimes on the floor, sometimes on her desk, once even in her closet, standing upright like it had been posed. She finally told me about it when we were hanging out one day, and I could tell she was scared. She'd never believed in anything supernatural before, but this was messing with her. I joked around at first, telling her maybe the doll was haunted, but the look on her face told me this was no joke. So I suggested she get rid of it, throw it away, burn it, whatever. She agreed and decided to dump the doll at a donation bin the next day. That night, though, something terrifying happened. Maria woke up to the sound of heavy breathing, except it wasn't hers. She opened her eyes and the doll was right there, sitting on her chest, its stitched mouth inches from her face. Its button eyes seemed darker, almost like they were alive. She was paralyzed with fear, but then, as she stared at it, the doll's mouth moved. The stitches parted, and in this raspy, barely audible voice, it whispered, "You can't get rid of me." She screamed, threw the doll across the room, and bolted out of her bed. Her parents came running in, and when she told them what happened, they didn't believe her. They thought she'd had a nightmare, but Maria wasn't taking any chances. The next morning, she took the doll, drove out to the middle of nowhere, and buried it. She wanted to make sure it was gone for good. Here's the creepy part. A few days later, she was cleaning her room, trying to get things back to normal, when she found something under her bed. It was the doll, covered in dirt, its button eyes staring up at her, as if it had crawled its way back. She didn't stick around after that. She moved in with a friend for a while and never slept in that room again. And as far as I know, the doll is still in that house somewhere.